Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. And today I have the lovely Maria Newman. I have known Maria probably for about 5 years. We met through a networking group, and I visit that networking group occasionally and have actually been part of her podcast and also taught at the networking group. Today I've invited Maria on because as a mum, she has extra pressure that us women that don't have kids go through. And I've invited her to share her experience of working in the corporate world, managing children, a husband, and her life. So, welcome, Maria. It's a pleasure to have you here. Would you like to introduce yourself and just share your story?
Thank you, Karen. So, my story. Well, the background is I am now obviously married. I have 2 children. I live in beautiful Bristol and I have the privilege of being self-employed. However, that isn't how it's always been. My career started in the corporate world, having only ever worked for my family business, which was a lovely little seaside town in Burnham-on-Sea. It was a lovely little restaurant. And so stepping into corporate was, I'm going to say, like a baptism of fire, because it's going from being protected in a loving family environment to nobody knows you, you are here by yourself, come prove yourself. And so the beginning of my career was very supportive because I was part of the graduate training program, and you have a training officer assigned to you who, nurtures you and guides your way through, guides you as you step through the different parts of your training program. And then you're released into the population of the fully employed within the business. And it's like, right, now it's your turn to take control of your destiny and see where you go. And I suppose the thing that I want to bring out is that I worked for a male-dominated organization. The female population was 3%. So really, really small. And fortunately, I grew up in a male-dominated culture. So my heritage is Greek Cypriot. It's very male-dominated. So that wasn't sort of unusual. Although I remember the time it smacked me in the face was I went into the canteen, oblivious to like all the men around me. And it wasn't until I'd picked up my cutlery and I was looking for somewhere to sit that I thought, oh my word, it's just like a sea of men. And I'd been working for the company, I think, for at least a week. Anyway, so I climbed the corporate ladder, and I've reflected on this quite a bit. And I think getting myself to where I wanted to go was driven by proving myself. And that wasn't proving myself because I was a female in a male organization. It was proving myself because I wanted to show that I could do this. It wasn't gender orientated, and it wasn't gender orientated at an unconscious level either. I wanted to show that I could be as good as the next person. And what I found really quickly was the need to fit in order to do well, the need to be a certain type of person in order to do well. And my first memory of that, it's hilarious. My first memory was I was in an interview with three senior managers, all men. At this point, I'm not fazed by it. This is the norm. And the reason why I was in this interview was because we'd been selected. There were three of us who had been selected for the what was known as the Chairman's Award. So as part of the graduate program, you were it was like the best graduate. Anyway, I didn't win. Never mind. My training officer gave me the feedback from the panel, which was something like, Maria, you can be overwhelming. You're like a little puppy that just bounds up to people and gives them a lick on the face. And that can be, to some people, a little bit too much. And at the time, I was like, oh, okay, so this is not a good thing. She sort of said, you need to just, these weren't her words, but basically like rein it in. And I thought, oh, okay then. So if I want to get on, I need to rein it in. And I'm going to say that was the beginning of my trying to fit this persona so that I could get on and that I could progress. And there was lots of stuff that then consequently got thrown on top. And it was all about, so what are you doing to fix the problems? Because the area I was in project management. So it was always about, delivering on time, delivering to a lower cost, delivering to the customer's expectation. And invariably, if something was going wrong or wasn't quite going in the right direction, it was, so what are you doing? So, I'm trying to become this person. And now it's all about, well, I've got to be doing lots of stuff as well, lots of actions, proving that I have thought of every eventuality and I've put in place every action that will ensure that the only place we're going is towards like the final destination. And there were several times where I literally hit burnout to the point of I couldn't go to sleep. I'd wake up the next morning and I either went to see HR or I went to see my manager, depending on who it was. And that happened to me twice. So clearly I didn't learn the first time. Um, and it's horrible. It's a really horrible place to be. Trying to go to sleep and your brain is racing with not so much how can you help yourself to get out of this, but how can you satisfy others in order for the spotlight not to be focused on you and for them to go, oh no, she does know what she's doing. And both times, all it took was a couple of days off to reset myself to then go back into it. The problem is, at the time when you're going through it, it's horrible. It's not a nice place to be. You cannot see the wood from the trees. You have a loss of appetite. You are second guessing yourself like there's nobody's business. And you can't make decisions. It's like, well, what if I make the wrong decision? What will people think of me? And at the same time, on the outside, nobody is seeing this. Nobody is seeing this whatsoever. As far as the outside world is concerned, everything is fine. You are still the person that they have come to know. You are still capable of doing the job that you're doing. And it's really, really weird because nobody has any idea except for you and the people you share how you really feel with. And the bizarre thing is, you don't want to share that with anybody because, again, it's a vicious circle. What will they think of me? What will happen? What will the consequence be? Will I then stop my career from progressing? And it's really, really damaging. And I've seen in myself that this is a reoccurring pattern when I start to put too much pressure on myself because I'm trying to prove myself to the outside world rather than looking after myself and just being me.
Do you think in the corporate world there is this perception that you cannot be weak?
I think it depends who you work for. I think if you're seen as someone who is capable and has potential, looking at it personally, I don't want to give anybody the impression that I am weak, because if I show any vulnerability, my perception is that all of a sudden the potential and the capable person they see is not there anymore, and then I can't progress at the pace at which I want to progress at. So it's all, for me, it is all about perception and what we think the reality is. And that's what I think is really important that everybody takes on board. It's the thoughts in your head that determine the reality that you live. And those thoughts are very much your own. It's up to you to acknowledge them, to be aware of them, and to then decide, well, which seat of this car am I in? Would you like to be in the passenger seat where it feels like life is being done to you? Or would you like to be in the driver's seat where you have control of the direction you are traveling? And I think a lot of us sit in the passenger seat, not realizing that's where we have put ourselves. And I'm really, really focused on ensuring that my children put themselves in the driver's seat, because I mean, it's only natural for children because they're still trying to understand the world, know where they fit in, know who they are. And I can see it where they're clearly in the passenger seat. And I'm thinking, you don't realize how much control you have here. And you've just you're giving it away. You have choices. You can decide what is next. And yeah, going to be scary, going to feel uncomfortable. There's uncertainty out there. And yet, which one is going to get you to where you want to go? Being in the passenger seat or being in the driver's seat?
Question. I know you say you were brought up in a male-dominated world and you weren't particularly conscious of having any bias towards the fact you were in a male-dominated work environment and that you spent time reviewing that. But do you think at a level that perhaps is so deep that as a woman you still needed to prove yourself as a woman that you could do as good as a man?
I think there's 2 points to that. I think probably because we don't really know what's deep down inside. And secondly, the way I grew up, I never let any male character dominate me or bring me down. I would always question, and no, I would give my dad a particularly hard time. And me and my dad, we are very much peas in a pod. We are very similar. We've got a very close relationship. And I would push back on everything. And I can give you an example. So typically, if say family or friends would come round to the house, my dad would be the first one to say to me, I'm the second oldest. I've got an older brother and a younger sister. He'd say to me, go and help your mum in the kitchen, bring through like the drinks and so on. And I would turn around and I would say, and why have you not asked my brother? Is it because I'm a girl? So I wasn't quiet. And I was not shy in asking questions that were sort of, to the person who was hearing the questions, they could be quite uncomfortable because they knew the answer as much as I knew the answer. And they were potentially uncomfortable with the answer as much as I was thinking, that's not right, is it? And even now, when I've had the odd conversation with my dad about it, he's sort of like, looked at me in a way of, that's just the way things were back there. Not as an excuse to say it's okay. That's just the way things were. And yes, you're probably right. It wasn't right, was it? So I think, like you said, like deep down, it buried because I wasn't ever going to let my consciousness acknowledge it. There might have been this, well, I've got to prove myself as a woman. And then at the same time, it really didn't bother me though. I had female colleagues who would actually say to me, in a meeting, they were fully aware that they were maybe the only one, at a minimum, the minority. And sometimes they wouldn't say anything because of that. Whereas I'd be like, well, I've got a voice, I'm going to use it. Full stop.
You've hit on a topic that perhaps needs to be explored far more than it ever is the conditioning we are given as a woman that we're not supposed to speak up. You grew up in an environment, and the kind of personality you have is to challenge what is normal. Because I can imagine quite a lot of girls of your age facing their fathers and saying something like that, they'd have been ripped to pieces. So, from the perspective that you were this outspoken girl, and it was interesting when you commented about being in the work environment and your manager actually saying to you, tone it back, stop being out there. That is awful if it was a woman saying that, because she was actually conditioned to accept the normal rather than question the normal. And that terminology, even if it wasn't the precise words, would have had an impact on you at a level that you would have been aware of, but your body would have taken on board and gone, oh, okay, so I'm not allowed to be me. And that was, I'm sure, the start of everything that caused your breakdown or very close to a breakdown. And the fact that you experienced it twice and nobody thought to question it says a lot about the kind of person you are, that you could get up from basically a nervous breakdown or a breakdown full stop to go back to work, to then proceed to behave in the same way, to then go into another breakdown, and still nothing was dealt in any way, shape, or form, other than to say, well, basically have a couple of days off and you'll be fine.
Yeah, it's hilarious, isn't it? When you look at it like that, um, because it is, everything, every time I've done anything in my life, I will not be beaten. That is the thing. Nobody is going to hold me back. I'm not going to hold me back. If there's something that needs doing and that I want to do, I'm going to do it. It's as simple as that, even if it's like to my physical detriment. And I think a lot of it is because of the perception of, what is successful. And I want to be successful. And in a traditional sense, I think a lot of people look at success and say, well, it's all about money, when actually success isn't just about money. There's people who have got bags of money, and yet, although they might think they're successful, they are miserable. So, I mean, is that okay? And it does, and that's to do with conditioning, because, from a societal point of view, we've been conditioned to view wealth as well, you are successful. And yeah, I would say looking back at my corporate career from a mental well-being point of view, they weren't there yet. And we are talking about, I mean, I've been out of the corporate world now since 2015. So you've got to go back even further. So well-being of the workforce, it didn't exist.
Yeah, but does it even really now?
Well, I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, because I've been out of the world for so long. I don't know if organizations just pay lip service to it. I would think that there will be some organizations who are, they see it as very important and they do implement it. I think some of the larger organizations that have been around for a long time will find it more difficult to implement because, culturally,
Mm.
it's difficult to change culture.
Mhm.
And it takes a very long time to change culture. So, the organization I worked for was a manufacturing engineering organization. So really traditional.
Very
Ex
traditional.
exactly. It's all about getting the product out the door. You don't feel very well. All right, then take a few minutes and then get back on it because there's work to be done. So yeah, well-being wasn't a thing. And again, that's not to say it's right or wrong.
Hmm.
That's how it was then.
Yeah.
And I'm
Well,
hoping,
we have progressed, haven't we? A bit.
yeah, 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 yeah. And it is, I mean, you just got to look at if we're not conscious, if we choose to be on autopilot, we will operate from a position of our conditioning. It's that
Mm-hmm.
simple. And so many people are literally living life on autopilot, sleepwalking through life, and they don't even realize it. This is the sad fact. So if you want to live your best life, I know that phrase is probably overused and people have gone, ew, when I've said it. But if you want to live your best life, your number one starting position is you need to wake up.
Mm. Totally and absolutely. What woke you up from the corporate world?
What woke me up? Do you know what? It will seem like the smallest of things, and yet it's had the biggest impact. So, when I first went into the corporate world, I remember being in a car with a senior manager. We were on our way to Uxbridge University to recruit some year in industry students. And I said to him, because I'm a keen bean, how did you get to where you got to today? And he said, well, I started as an apprentice. They then gave me a full-time job. I progressed up the corporate ladder. I married my wife. We had some children. And now, well, the pension is too good to leave. And on the inside, I could feel myself just going, oh my word, that just seems like a life sentence. And on the outside, I was like smiling sweetly. And I made an agreement with myself that I obviously broke, that I would never work for a company for any longer than 5 years. I didn't want to be tied in. Fast forward, you know, I'm working for this company, 5 years turns to 10 years, turns to 15 years, and I am in danger of becoming that person. And fortunately, the last project I worked on was to revamp this big, what was an old drawing office. And we made it into quite a modern environment. And I remember coming home and sort of saying to my husband, and I was pregnant at the time with my second child, I don't think I want to go back afterwards because there's this beautiful office we've created, and we've done it in a very getting people's ideas, and it was all done like together rather than I came up with the idea and then said, right, this is where you're going to work. So I don't think I can go back because it's really nice and shiny, and they're not going to look after it. It's not going to be shiny forever, because obviously it can't be, because people are going to use the space. I said, I don't think I can go back. I need to go and work for someone else. To which, my husband was like, but this is a really good job. It's a really good company. And I said, but I've never worked for anywhere else. You have. I need to experience the world and also keep the promise I made myself. And that was the beginning of the next chapter, because I took voluntary redundancy and I didn't go back. And at the time when I made the decision, I was going to step into another corporate position somewhere. And yet that never happened.
Why do you think that never happened? What was it that was inside you that was going, I can't do this anymore?
Well, I went to see a life coach. She's amazing, because I wanted work to complement my life rather than it being a thing you do in order to get money to finance your life. And she said to me, Maria, what would you really like to do with your life? And this is probably where my unconscious selves found their voice to speak. And they said, I'd really like to be a business owner, to have my own business, but I haven't got an idea. And I think that's because although I'd seen the highs and lows of my parents having had their own business, and I went into corporate because I didn't want all of that, I think I realized that actually there might be highs and lows. However, it's worth it when it's something that you are cultivating, that you have full control over, that you don't have to ask anybody for permission to do anything, and you can make an impact on the world without having to apologize for anything.
Mm. Yeah, because when you're in control of your own business, if you screw up, you screw up. There's nobody going to stand over you and say, that was stupid. You might say it to yourself, but
Yeah.
we know we can do that very well. But there's a totally different element to being your own boss, to being managed by somebody. And I think for a lot of women who have chosen to become self-employed, there is this recognition that the aim is to give themselves more time to have with their family. However, that doesn't always work because I've got to do the business, but I've got to look after my children. As a mother, I'm not a mother, so I'm asking you as a woman who has no children and has no experience of that kind of life. What would you say to them if they're already in that position, or they're even thinking about setting their own business up, having had their children and recognizing that there's too much uncertainty in being employed, because there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty when you're employed. Probably more so sometimes than actually being self-employed, because at least as a self-employed person, you can either sink or swim. So what would you say to a woman then who's facing that situation, having been there yourself?
So there are two things I want to say, and hopefully I won't forget the second one. The first one is, if you're going to be successful as a business owner, you need to have three things. You need to believe that you will be successful. You need to have the hunger to be successful, and you need to take action to be successful. If you don't have one of those, then you've stopped yourself before you've started.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two, I haven't forgotten. I'm going to say something now that, again, people will cringe when I say this. You need to put in place healthy boundaries, and then you need to stick to them. And I learned this a little bit into my journey. So, going from being in corporate to being self-employed, you take with you the mindset of being in corporate. So you think, well, I've got to work all these hours. And because I'm a business of one, I've got to do all of the roles. So the first boundary is to accept that you're in a new environment. You've got all the transferable skills and so on, but this is a different environment. You can decide how you play it. Nobody's going to tell you. You haven't got a boss who's sat on your shoulder telling you what to do. You get to design your life. So, which boundaries do you need to put in place to allow that life to be your reality? And I mean like everything. And you don't need to start all at once because that's going to be overwhelming. So it's the simple things of what time are you going to get up? What time are you going to start work? What time are you going to finish work? Which days of the week are you going to work? How are you going to manage your inbox? How are you going to manage social media? How are you going to manage your home life? What will you do? What won't you do? What needs to be delegated to other people? Because you cannot do it all by yourself. And even if, and I'm not a single parent, but I am going to say, if you are a single parent, look at where the network around you. You don't have to do it by yourself. And that's one of the things that definitely as a mum, and as a woman, we're not very good at asking for help. And yet help is your friend. So, and a big lesson I learned was when I first went into business, we'd put the children into holiday club. And then I think it was now 3 years ago. So my daughter has just turned 13, my son is 10. We changed our minds because there was one particular incident where I took my children to holiday club and I could see they really didn't want to be there. And at the same time, I was like, they're only going to be this age for what will seem like a second. And there'll be a point where they don't actually want to spend any time with me. So that's when I heavily reduced the number of weeks I work in the year to be the same as the school holidays. So I am fortunate that I only work 39 weeks of the year and my revenue has not been affected by it. So
Because you manage your time effectively because you know you've got this time. Whereas I think if you're a full-time person in a business and you have no other commitments, you tend to do things that are not as well structured, or you don't plan as well as you could do, or you think, well, I just want to finish this kind of thing. We were chatting before and I said to you, it's like my world has just gone mad and I've got so much to do and I'm on a train for 2.5 hours and I'm sitting there thinking, what can I do? Because suddenly I've got all this spare time and it's like, I can't waste it. I've got to do something with it. But that's the worst thing you can possibly do, especially if you have a family or even just for your own well-being. I'm lucky in the sense of I do tend to do things and then think, that's it for the moment, I'm walking away. So I'm not necessarily the best person to speak to about structure, but it gets done. And it gets done in the way that matches me rather than the way that most people would look at my life and think, God, Karen, really? But we all have our own way of managing. So we're running out of time. My last question to you is, what would you say to somebody who is facing something, whether it's a career choice, whether it's a relation choice, just whether it's a choice in how they want to have their life? What would be, and this is off the cuff, so I'm being a bit unfair to you, what would you say faced with something like that? Somebody, what would you say?
that is a great question because so many people come to me at like a crossroads in life. And I would first of all ask them to look within themselves and say, or answer the question, why, what makes this a problem? Because before you move forward, you need to understand where you are, which isn't always where you think you are. I know that sounds a bit cryptic, but we only focus on like the surface level stuff. And if you are always trying to resolve the surface level stuff without really understanding what's underneath it, that's going to follow you around. So you'll get into another situation that will be different. So at the moment, you might be saying that the issue is your relationship. You resolve that by, let's say, you break up, and then you move on to wherever, and all of a sudden you find yourself in, well, I don't like my career. The thing potentially has followed you because you've only dealt with the surface level issue. So I want people, if they find themselves in that situation, to be really brave, because it's going to be uncomfortable, and say, what makes this a problem? And keep on asking yourself that question until you're satisfied that you've actually found the thing that makes this a problem. And then face that. You might not be ready in that moment because it might feel too uncomfortable. At some point, if you want life to change, that needs to be addressed.
And on that note, I'm going to end this, but it's been very, very helpful and insightful. Your certainty of how you have lived your life and what you've wanted, even as a young child, has come through. And I think for a lot of women, that is what they are missing, that certainty of who they are and what they want. Me, yeah, I've been there and done that, as you well know. You know my story. But it's recognizing that despite what you've been through nervous breakdowns or breakdowns. I've been through a nervous breakdown, but you can always come out the other side and you can always improve. So thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Karen.